Alex and May can't join today. They're apparently on vacation in Mexico, so good for them.
Good for them, yeah.
Alex just bought an RSV4, so like all of us now are like on Aprilias.
Awesome. That's great. So tell Alex thank you for us.
Yeah, for sure. Well, and May kind of kicked it off because she bought that RS660, and I honestly I wasn't really paying that much attention to it because I thought, and then she got it, and she got the bright orange or the bright yellow one, and I was like, this thing is really cool. How come I haven't been paying attention to this thing? And then I rode it, and I was like, this is way better than it should be for what it costs. Like, this is what a humdinger of a motorcycle that thing is. So May's really who we have to blame for all of us ending up on Aprilias.
I think a lot of people get scared off by the Italian brand, and I understand it, especially given the history of it. But all these new Italian bikes, they're all pretty reliable nowadays, I think.
Yeah, I don't think it's anything like what it was, like even 15, 20 years ago.
Yeah, absolutely. So they've definitely made a push to make it like an everyday bike, for sure. Yeah.
Well, and yeah, it's really interesting to me too how Ducati, and Aprilia have a very different approach to kind of the manufacturing and the production and everything like that. And you end up, even though you have kind of two Italian passion brands, they're quite different in character.
Yeah, I would agree. Like, I feel like Aprilia is so, it's like they're really focused on handling, right? So it's like handling, and then, I mean, I would say this for both of them, but I mean, that engine character was like a really big thing, like especially going to the V4 really early for Aprilia was a really, really big deal for them. And I think, they just really focus on having excellent handling, and I hope that everybody who rides it will really appreciate it because of the time and work that goes into it. That's really sort of the focus of that brand.
The front end feel on that RSV4 is got to be the best front end of any motorcycle I've ever ridden. And I was coming from the 848, which was notoriously bad. It didn't have enough trail. The offset on the triple clamps was way off. So changed the triple clamps and it was better. But then to go from that to the Aprilia, you're like, oh, what was I missing? Why did I spend so much time like fighting with that lack of trail? And then you get to the Aprilia and you're like just braking so deep and so hard into corners, and that front is just so planted. It's a really wonderful characteristic for a motorcycle that makes over 200 horsepower.
Yeah, absolutely. To have that level of confidence, right? That's something that they work really, really hard to instill in the bikes. So I'm glad that you noticed. That's fantastic.
Oh yeah. Yeah. Well, I noticed it on that 660 because like I built up the little 390 for my wife, the little KTM, and then to hop on that 660, I'm like, this thing is better. Like, why? I should have just bought her one of these for a track bike,
Yeah.
But anyway, we're getting a little off topic. We're just like gushing on how much I really like the motorcycle. How did you get into this? Because this is something that I was extremely interested in high school and into college. How did you get into it? How did you get through the process and end up working, getting kind of like what I would consider the dream job?
Well, I mean, I guess that would have to kind of go back. Like, I went to Olympus High in Holiday, Utah, right? Like, this born and raised in Utah. And I had this really great art teacher there, and she made sure to get these college brochures like every year. And I only took art for like 1 year. Like, my parents are very traditional Asian. It's like when I told them that I wanted to be a designer, they told me that's a great way to become homeless. And, they were not thrilled with this idea, but I took one class, and that's where I met Mrs. McConkey over at Olympus High. And I also met one of my best friends, Dave Osler. And it's just like the support that I got there really sort of helped me to decide to kind of do this it's kind of a circuitous route that I took. And to be honest, when I first graduated from high school, I went to the University of Utah and I studied computer science. So I think I was just really trying to be that, I was just trying to sort of keep the folks happy. And it's like, they wanted a doctor, a lawyer, or an engineer. And so I decided to go the engineer route. I started working for a couple of video game companies, and it's like, it just wasn't me. It's like I really wanted to make it happen, and I still have an interest in it, but I remember this one time I was working for this robotics company, and it was actually my dad's friend's company. And I like after about 3 months, I went home and I told my dad, I can't do this for the rest of my life. I can't. I I played at Art Center back in like maybe 2001, 2002, got accepted, and then that was it. It's like then my path was sort of set. But I will say, most of these design schools that teach transportation design, like, these schools really sort of teach like automotive design. And so even in school, like even after I got into this college that I really wanted to go to, I really had to fight to get to have the opportunity to design bikes, because a lot of times the teachers would just flat out tell me, it's like, you can't do a bike in my class because we don't really know like how to help you. Like, we can't critique your work. Like, we can't really give you like great suggestions. And so it was really sort of, I was really lucky in college that I had a roommate there, Curtis Carruth. And, he's worked all over as well, but we were both like totally motorcycle nuts. And we both had decided early on that we really wanted to study motorcycle design. So we were really kind of fortunate to find each other and to be roommates, because, we could do homework together and we just kind of nerd out about bikes every day. But it was really sort of, I was just so lucky to find Curtis, And after that, I graduated. It's like I was looking for a job for a little while, and my third stroke of luck is that I found a mentor in Kohei Iguchi. He used to be a teacher at Art Center, and he was a designer for Honda for a long time. But he helped me get my first job over at Suzuki, and I was I think I was their only American designer for a while, and I was working out of Orange County. Sadly that studio is not around anymore, but I was there for 5 years, and that's really sort of what helped me get my foot in the door. And then after that, it's a lot easier. Like once you're in, it's a lot easier. But getting in, I think that's that's how it is for a lot of industries. But that's kind of how it started, really.
Well, and you've worked on a lot of really interesting motorcycles, and part of why I was really excited to talk to you about this is because we as the consumer don't see or even hear about what you do. And yet it's such a big part of what we love about motorcycles, the aesthetic look at them. Like a new motorcycle comes out and you're like, oh, well, the piston goes 3 millimeters further, and, the bore changed by this and the rate changed by whatever degree. And, we dropped this much weight. But unless it's Ducati and we're talking about like a few of like those famous designers at Ducati, we never hear or see or even get a glimpse into what it takes or what considerations are made into what the thing looks like. And for so many of us, we have like the poster on the wall, and like what it looks like is a huge part of the decision-making process as to what bike we want. I just love the look of that one, right?
Yeah. Yep. Yeah. It's a lot of work. I think especially nowadays, like, I'd say the last 10 years, it's gotten a little bit more complicated because we're always kind of looking at like changing the process. So I think in the earlier days, it was a little bit easier. You get out like markers, chalk, pencils, and you would just do like all these cool sketches and stuff, right? And they had like a lot of flash and stuff, but then you would take that and you would start working on a clay model, right? And the clay model process, that's still really a large part of what we do. Some companies have actually eliminated it. Like actually Aprilia, like, I never touched clay, but when I was at Kawasaki, like, I was shaving the clay, like, for, if you look at the current Ninja 650, like I did a lot of the clay work myself, on that bike. And, it's interesting because like every studio is so different. Like, I wish that there was like an easy way to describe like what all the different studios do, but like I've noticed, working with the Japanese companies, working with an American company, now working with an Italian company, every single company has a totally different process. And it's crazy that they're still able to sort of bring that all together into this working two-wheel, very complicated, sophisticated machine. But, generally speaking, it starts out with talking to product planning. And those guys have a tough job because, they're looking at a really, really, it's a global market. I think actually that's one thing that I want your viewers to kind of understand is that, like, when we're designing bikes, you know, even though I'm an American, it's like we really have to look at this global market, because if you look at the number of units sold in the U.S., it's dwarfed by some of these other markets. So, we kind of go back and forth with product planning, and we talk about, it's like, what do we think is going to really sell in these markets and stuff. We'll decide which markets that we want to go to. Then we start with, sketch phase. That could be, at Kawasaki, like they would just assign one designer to it, and, whatever they produce is what they produce. Other companies like Polaris and, sometimes with Piaggio, they'll do this too. They'll do a sketch competition where several designers sort of put up like their best ideas, and then they whittle it down to the, maybe like the strongest 2 or 3. And then they sometimes they'll do like a focus group, or internally they'll decide which one they think is the strongest, and then they move forward. But then they'll take that into the 3D phase. And that could be either digital or it could be analog with clay. And it just really depends on the company, right? But I think in the past as well, like the designers, like that separation between doing the 2D, the sketches, and the 3D was a little bit more, they're a little bit more separate. But I think nowadays we're sort of responsible for a lot more of our own 3D work, which is both clay and digital, right? So the number of things that the designers have to do nowadays is actually like increased quite a bit. We just have like, different, more tasks that we have to do at a higher level, and with the EV thing coming on, all the different regulations that are, coming into play like globally, that also sort of throw things up in the air just a little bit, because the way that we design for that is going to be a little bit different than how we design for, a gas bike. So that's kind of how it is. But like right now we're kind of in this crazy time, but it's really exciting, right? Because we have all these new opportunities to design for bikes that we haven't really thought about before. Like, how do you design a bike that doesn't have like an exhaust, right? Like, because that's usually like actually a pretty major styling point for a lot of these bikes. So it's a really interesting time, but our process has been changing quite a bit lately, especially like also adding things like VR. We are adding like VR to the process and stuff. So, I mean, it's already been in the mix for a while, but not all the studios use it as heavily as others. So,
do you favor or see an advantage to like the old school analog clay model? Because those are like the photos you see, and always so compelling to me to see like what it looks like in this kind of orange clay, versus are there advantages to doing it digital? Is that just like a faster process, or do you miss things in the digital thing that you can only see when it's something you can actually touch and feel?
Yeah, that's a good question, because it's both of them have pros and cons. When we look at the clay, you have that immediate feedback, right? You can sit on a clay model and you can kind of check the ergos like automatically, right? It's so fast to be able to go through, actually check what the ergonomic, you could do your ergo check so easily, like especially like how your legs fit around a tank, right? And that's something that's really hard to replicate when we're doing it in VR, because in VR, we like just the controllers, we can feel like what's happening there, but like, it's kind of hard to sort of mimic that in VR. So with clay, I think it's just sort of like being able to touch the surface, seeing it with your own 2 eyes, and seeing how much crown a surface has, like how much it sort of bubbles out. If it's too flat, sometimes it looks almost concave, and we can see those things immediately when we're doing it in clay. But with, clay's expensive. It requires a lot of space, and it requires a really high degree of skill. So a lot of times the designers kind of hack something in, and then we'll have professional clay modelers come in and clean up our chicken scratch. And with VR, the thing is like space, cost, time, it's like you gain that back. So what we'll do is that we'll make something virtually, and then we'll actually just mill it out, and then we could do our ergo checks on the milled out piece, right? So it does sort of increase that speed, but I do kind of find like with clay, you're going to get just a little higher bit of refinement of those surfaces. So there's pluses and minuses. I've done both. I like both, but probably moving forward, like you're just going to start seeing VR and just digital taking more and more of that. If you have this much time in the past you'd have this much for clay, and I think it's getting more and more compressed to the point where some studios just don't even use clay at all.
So that brings up a question that Alex actually had, which I think was really good. And I'm a huge MotoGP fan. I love, Aprilia is finally seeing some great success, but in the design aspect of it, especially talking about the shape of the tank, for us as riders, the shape of the tank is huge, especially when you're getting into the more performance aspect of it, how I move on the bike, how I'm able to hook my outside leg into the tank. How much input or how much information do you guys bring in from, like Maverick and, for the design based on what they're doing on the track? How much of that makes it into some of the designs that you guys are working on?
That's tough just because those guys are like a moving R&D studio, because the thing about MotoGP is that, some weekends they'll go towards something, and then the next weekend they'll be like, well, for this track, that's not what we want at all. So it kind of, it's sort of a moving target. And so it's hard to really use like some of their feedback, like in the production stuff. And then so much of what they're doing is, the focus is a little bit different, even when we compare it to like RSV4, right? So like the gas capacity, the fuel capacity that they need, if it's a short track, maybe they don't use like the full capacity of it. But then if we have, if our fuel range is only like, 90 miles or something, like I remember like the old BTR 1000s.
Yeah, I had one of those. Yeah.
I thought that was a great bike, but like people always complained about the range. They just said, man, this thing great, but I have to fill it up like, at every corner. And, we just kind of have to balance between that, the race heritage, but then also the practicality of it, because even if it's a bike that's really meant to live on the track, you're still going to get a ton of guys who just, use it for commuting and stuff. So it's always about finding that balance. But then we'll look at other things like, especially with aerodynamics, if you look at what Aprilia's been doing, with all the new bikes, they all have like the winglets and stuff. Like the Tuonos that I worked on, we had like the internal winglets, right? So we just wanted to make it so it's a little bit less out there. We wanted to leave that more for the RSV4, but we still wanted to have that downforce and that sort of look to it and stuff, so that was definitely inspired by the MotoGP bikes, and so we are seeing like some of that stuff come in. The tank is the hardest part though, just because like, the frame is so much of the cut of that tank and is also like tied to the shape of the frame. And like, if we're doing like a frame that doesn't really change from generation to generation and stuff, we're kind of tied to, some of the old tank shape and stuff, but, with the new ones, we did try to make the tanks a little bit lower and stuff so that you get like an easier tuck. And we are definitely, even though the race team is separate from what we do, Miguel Galuzzi, that, I'm sure you've heard of, famous for designing Monster and stuff. He's the design director, and he's always been sort of he's always had an eye towards the racing side, right? So he talks to those guys quite a bit, and we do try to get as much of that into it that we can, but at the same time, trying to keep it a production bike that's still like livable, you know what I mean? So it's sort of that balance between, the race DNA, but then keeping it like a livable day-to-day bike as well.
It's kind of, I was working with a racer once. I was getting some coaching from him, and he's like, show me how you sit on the bike. And I get on the bike and I do this, and he goes, oh, you need to have your guy make your tank a little bit lower and a little bit longer so you can get, and like, oh, thanks, I'll just have my guy make me a new tank, right?
Yeah.
Because you look at the MotoGP bikes and the tanks are relatively square. They kind of come back and drop off, and as a street rider, that could be kind of miserable to have that little point, like jabbing you right in the middle of the abdomen, right?
Yeah. So it's, I don't know. It's, when we have gone like really race bred, like we kind of come back with like some complaints and stuff like that. Or like, I think the other thing is that the race bikes are so customized for these shorter guys who are just, if we, I don't know, I'm not that tall. I'm like 5'10", but I mean, compared to like maybe Maverick or something, or like, you look at a Danny Pedrosa, I look like a giant next to that guy. you know?
I'm 5'7". I'm a normal size, so I
Yeah,
love
yeah,
all these like little. I think they're great.
yeah.
And then, you were talking about the aerodynamics too. I actually started on a process where we actually scanned some of your wings, and we were going to run them through some SolidWorks and see what's actually happening, because we don't ever get that information here. I'm curious, like, how much does that come into play? What is the actual effectiveness of some of these wings, and how do you work that into a design that's, you don't have like these little carbon fiber blades that are going to cut into, you know what I mean? I see a lot of problems that wings could pose from a design, functionality, reliability, or breakability standpoint.
Yeah, that's a huge issue. It's a tricky one, because I think, it's honestly, like, the winglets, I think most people know this, that, like, they're not really effective until you reach a certain speed. That speed is usually pretty high. So really it's kind of more for like the track day enthusiasts and stuff, is they're the ones who are actually going to see the actual, benefits of it. On some bikes that I've worked on, they do the winglets where they actually use it. They want that MotoGP look, but maybe they use it for a slightly different purpose. Like maybe it actually deflects wind away from the rider, right?
Oh, really?
So it might
Wow.
actually still create like some downforce and stuff. Like if you look at the current Ninja 650, that's the bike that I worked on when I was at Kawasaki. And if you look at it, they actually have some pass-through holes. And I actually took that from MotoGP Influence when I was over there. And really what it was is just to sort of deflect the air out, right? So you have the rider and you want to sort of have that little bubble that they're, that they're in. And it's just trying to reduce the wind blast that the rider has to face, because it's, I mean, I put MotoGP Influence into that bike, but it's Ninja 650, that's a commuter bike, so the aim is a little bit different for that one, right? It's more about comfort, right? But you still want like a style that, it's like one thing that I always say in the studio is that, like, I think motorcycle riders, the motorcycle kind of becomes like their avatar, right? And it's like, it's something that is like highly personal to them. And, really like a big thing is this, they just don't want their friends to laugh or like make fun of their bike and stuff. So like whether it's a commuter bike or whatever kind of bike you have, you just kind of want it to look good, So it could be like, it takes that MotoGP styling that's, in vogue right now. It's like, even for, a great commuter bike like a Ninja 650, you still want to put that stuff in because that's what those customers really demand. So
my nephew, all he wanted was a Ninja 650, and like, it's his first motorcycle, and he came to me and he's like, is a Ninja 650 a good bike? And I'm like, yes. And he loved that it looked, as far as he could tell, as like a new rider. To him, it looked just like a ZX6R, right? It was every bit as cool. But, even as far as growing the sport, making that more new rider, that commuter bike, that kinder, gentler motorcycle look every bit as badass as their MotoGP superstar is riding, there's an incredible amount of value in that, I think.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Like, I mean, that's the thing that this industry needs more of, is that, we just need like more younger riders and stuff, and just making sure that they have options that they like, that they actually want, is super, super important, when I look at this market, like, so much of the market is sort of top heavy right now, and it's just one of those things, like, a lot of times in my competition boards, I put things like iPhone and, Steam Deck and like, PlayStation as competitors to our bikes. Like, I don't necessarily look at other brands as competitors, but a lot of times I'll actually put things like, those are the things that are actually competing for their time, And so it's like, the brand of it is like less important, right? I'm just looking at what is competing for time with, for these young people, what's actually getting like their dollars and stuff, so it's crazy to me that we have to work so hard to make it compelling to them, because once they ride it, it's like most people are hooked right away, and it's crazy that like we have to work so hard to sell this thing, because it's such an incredible sport. It's so much fun to do, but yeah, like, until people, I think that's the thing, until you get their butts in the saddle, they're not convinced. you
Well,
know?
and this is something I really think the 660 platform has done so exceedingly well. The RS 660, the Tuono 660, now the Touareg 660,
Mhm.
all three of these bikes are so like it's a shame we don't have a dealer here in Utah because you look at those things in the flesh and they are stunning, right? And I'm really excited about the Touareg because that thing reminds me of the old Honda Transalps from back in the 80s that we all were like, I would kill for that thing. And it took Aprilia to kind of make it and make it accessible, right? And it's
Yeah.
the 660 motor is a gem. It's easy to ride. And then you make it look so cool. You know, like it's the first bike I recommend to anybody. Oh, you're looking for go look at a 660. You know,
Yeah.
I think they're exciting, right? They're cool. They're exciting.
Yeah. I mean, I really appreciate hearing that because I know that the team worked so hard on those bikes. And yeah, I think that's the thing is that like bringing some of that, people want that exotic Italian, DNA in their bikes and stuff, even from, first bike and stuff, and just bring that down to a level that they can actually, afford and stuff, I think is super, super important because I think lately, like you're seeing so many bikes that are 25,000 plus, especially from the Italians, right? And then there's kind of like this little dead zone, until like under $10,000 and stuff. And just trying to bring something where it's like, that sort of mystique at a price point that people can bear, was really,
Oh
really
yeah,
important.
that's a lot of motorcycle for 10 grand. I really do think you get the good suspension, you get the good dash, you get the technology package,
Okay.
right? Like you kind of get it. It's really not to just a gush on Aprilia. I think I would recommend it or commend any company that does this, that makes, has all the cool stuff and it looks cool in a at a price point that, especially kids today, they're dealing with a bigger challenge than you and I probably did. Housing's more expensive, like the job market's harder. It's like using the PlayStation and the iPhone is kind of like the competitor is probably a good approach, right? Because the amount of discretionary income at their disposal is less than you and I probably had.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, it's definitely harder for them. And it's like, we see it like every day, like when we're doing our customer research and stuff, so just trying to bring stuff down to, a level that people can live with, I think is super, super important because we want to keep this sport healthy. And, even though I work with Aprilia, it's like, I don't look down on any brands or anything. Like when I'm riding, I wave to everybody. Like, I don't care if they're on a scooter, on an electric, a Harley or a metric, I don't care. It's like I wave to everybody because, the health of the sport is really, really important because, the more people are out there riding, the more awareness car drivers have. And, when we think about things like lane splitting and lane filtering and stuff, the only way that we can really kind of push some of that legislation is like, we need to have like enough people, who are interested in it that the lawmakers actually push for those things. So it's, I'm all about just getting more riders out there because it's so important, for all of us, so yeah, I respect to everybody on two wheels.
Yeah, I'm with you. I love all motorcycles, right? I don't, like I know like a lot of the cruisers get a lot of hate. You worked at Polaris.
Mm-hmm.
I don't have any hate, man. Like as someone once said to me, and I quote him all the time, is I've never met a motorcycle I didn't want to ride. I've met plenty I didn't want to own, but I've never met a motorcycle I didn't want to ride.
That's a great one.
Know?
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, I totally
like,
feel that.
They're all cool.
Yeah. It's like, I think, when I was in school, someone noticed that, we'd be sitting out, somewhere for lunch or something. And all of my classmates, they would check out every car that'd come by. And I never looked up, it's just, I never even noticed like when the cars were going by. But like, even if for like some clapped out, like, old bike and stuff, I'd always check it out. It's like, oh, what does this guy have?
Oh, it's like, a Maxim. Oh, it's a Maxim.
Yeah, exactly.
That was one of the first bikes with the dual overhead cams. That was a big, right?
I remember this one time, like a Magna went by. I'm like, bro, you know what that thing is, man? It's like, it's like that engine. It's a V4.
I did so many, when I was in the Army, one of the drill sergeants had a Magna with the V4, right?
Yeah.
And every time he would ride by, I would look, and they're like, what are you looking at? You go do some push-ups. You're supposed to be looking at motorcycles. Like the V4, like the V4 is honestly my personal favorite engine configuration.
Same.
I love the V4, and I love seeing them coming back, right? You guys, Aprilia kind of kicked it off by making them, like back in the day, like the VFR, like I had a VFR poster on my wall as a kid. And then there was the VFR 400. Do you remember those?
Yes, I do.
Oh my gosh, they were so amazing.
Like I still want one. Yeah,
Yeah, me
absolutely.
too.
Absolutely.
Yeah, if one came up, I would totally pick up a VFR 400. They are,
Yeah.
oh, and you feel like a superhero. Like they spin up to like 18,000 RPM and they sound so cool. But anyway,
It's just like, even if you're just putting around and stuff, I'm just sitting there. It's like, man, that thing sounds like a MotoGP bike, and it's just like that sound. I just cannot, I mean, I will say, like, I appreciate, like, all the engines. Like, it's just kind of a funny story. Like, I remember when I was working at Polaris, I decided to, I was talking Kawasaki, and those guys, gave me an offer and stuff. And someone was to say, it's like, Kawasaki, like, why are you going over there? And I just remember, telling a friend of mine, it's like, bro, like, these guys made a supercharged inline four that makes, like, the track one makes like 300 horsepower. I mean, that got like my respect like right away. I'm just like, I don't think anyone else will do that. Like, the only company that's crazy enough to do that is Kawasaki. And it's like, I hope people will just realize like how hard it is to do something like that at a Japanese company. And like, I will always have respect for Kali for doing the H2R. Like, that thing will just always have a place in my heart, man. So because
well, and I'm stoked they brought the 4-cylinder 400 over to America.
yeah,
I'm really excited about that too, because
yeah. So I mean, I don't know, these companies that are just pushing and stuff. I just have like a ton of respect and just a lot of admiration for these companies that are just sticking, just putting it out there and stuff, and they're giving us. I feel like there's a time where it's like we didn't really have like poster material, right? You were talking about how you had like a poster of like a VFR like in your room and stuff. And it's like, I feel like, the industry is really trying to sort of give like young people that, they're giving that to me. It's like, I want to put a poster of it like, in my room and stuff, so it's an exciting time, on motorcycles. It really, really is, because of like, for a while, everyone was just going inline four or like a single or it's like an inline twin or something. But now it's like, just, you see all these triples, you see like cross-plane Craig, and like there's just so much variety when it comes to that stuff. So it's a really exciting time. It really is.
So you were mentioning that, you do a lot of market research, and a lot of motorcycles are not necessarily designed for America. So what does that necessarily mean? What did different demographics want out of a motorcycle that Americans don't buy or don't want? Like, I'm really curious how that plays out.
That's a trick. Yeah, it's like some of it's price point, right? Like, I think one thing that I want people to sort of understand about like just the global market is like just how big it is, and like, it's like the things that are really popular, like in your city or your state, isn't necessarily something that's gonna like, if we just do these things, it's not gonna turn the company around. Like when we look at like the U.S. I think last year they sold like around 550,000 units in the U.S., right? And it seems like a really big number. But then when you think about Vietnam, they sold 3 million units. Indonesia, they sold 5.4 million units. And then China sold, I think, over 16 million. And in 2019, India, those guys sold like, I think, over 21 million units in 2019. I mean, 21 million units versus 550,000 in the US, even if they're not making this much margin and stuff, that's a big number, right? So like, of course with India, like they're just not in the same place that we are. So, I mean, we're shooting at a, smaller displacement, smaller, it's like costs and stuff. But, kids around the world, they all have the internet, right? Doesn't matter like where you live. And they all see MotoGP and World Superbike, and that's really what they want, So I think it's a lot like the RS660 for like the U.S. European market. How do we bring some of that excitement to, how do we deliver that to a price that they can live with, So that's kind of like the one of the bigger differences. But you look at the different riding conditions, like Southeast Asia, they're going to get a lot more rain than most of the U.S. does, right? So the way that they sort of ride their bikes and stuff is going to be a little bit different. For a long time in the U.S., like they really like fat tires on cruisers and stuff like that. Thankfully kind of went away and stuff. But I mean, Do you know what I mean? Like that was sort of like a US only, like very, very specific to that market. And it really wasn't like big anywhere else, So I think it's just sort of, it's sort of surprising how many similarities there are between the different markets, especially with young people. Like I think the older generations, there's a lot more differences in those markets between different countries. But then when we look at the young people, the younger markets, Gen Z and stuff, like they don't know what life is without the internet, right? So it's like they're looking at Instagram and stuff, and they're looking at TikTok, and they're looking at, they're all seeing the same stuff, right? So they tend to have a little bit more similar tastes no matter what country you go to, So that's been sort of like an interesting trend, right? But then like the older you go, it seems like, a lot of times like their tastes are a little bit more set, So even if they see a lot of things on the internet and stuff, it doesn't really seem to sway them as much. So yeah, I would say like there's things like that, but then also like, the US, like scooters, they just don't sell, man. They just don't. I mean, there might be pockets of it, but scooters are just not a US thing, and I get it. I mean, it might change something in the future. We're always looking for that, but you look at Europe and like the rest of the world, like, Asia especially, it's like, how do we give that DNA, the MotoGP, the racing DNA to like a scooter and stuff? How do we make it exciting, And you see these things that sort of pop out, that come out of it. Like Honda came out with like an adventure scooter, and the name of it's kind of escaping me and stuff. But I mean, it's a really tough looking, little scooter that's selling really, really well. They took these two things in Europe, scooters and adventure bikes, and they were able to successfully meld the two like together into like this really successful motorcycle over there. So, you kind of look for those types of opportunities, like, what's in the zeitgeist for these young people? What's in the zeitgeist for the older customers? Like, how do we bring something fresh and new to those guys? So we're always looking at these markets and seeing like what's popping for those guys.
So what has been some of your design inspiration? Like who did you take inspiration from as like that's the aesthetic that I am really drawn to, or really standout designs that you just think are really great?
It really depends on the market. Like, I'll give you one example. So I worked on an early iteration of the Indian Challenger when I was over at Polaris. So, I worked on an early iteration, and then they canceled that project, and then it came back to life. A good friend of mine, Ian Dunn, super talented guy, but he took it and brought it to life. He's the one who took like, those bits and pieces and really sort of made this cohesive design that you see on the road today. But when I started on that project, I looked at the customer, and what I really drew inspiration from is that, it's a very American market. You look at the difference between an American performance machine versus like a European or Asian performance machine. I looked at like 60s muscle cars, 70s muscle cars, a lot of Mopar stuff. And, for Challenger, I drew a lot on like just old, like, Dodge Power. It's like that sort of like, instead of an arrow going through the air, I want it to be more like a blunt thing, like more like a fist going through the air, And so it really sort of depends on the market. But for, that market, I thought that was actually the right inspiration for that market, When I worked on the Ninja 650, I think these riders are really aspirational. And so, I think they're smart enough not to buy like an H2 as their first bike, right? They're smart enough not to buy ZX-10R as their first bike, but that's where they want to get to, right? And they don't want to sacrifice like the style of it, just because they're into their first bike and stuff. So I took a lot of inspiration, actually from MotoGP, because that's the feedback that I was getting is like, hey, can we make these things look like race bikes, right? So that's why I put like the aero features on it. It's like just kind of giving it a little bit more presence. Like the feedback that we got with the previous one is that it felt like a little bit small. The previous one felt smaller than the Ninja 400. So we just wanted to make sure that this one looks like a logical step up, from the 400 to the 650 and stuff. So, we're going to do things like that. With the Aprilia stuff, it's like sometimes I would look at something a little bit more abstract, because like it's more of an exotic bike, but I mean, with these with the new Aero, it kind of gives you this opportunity to do something different. And so what I was looking at is like, what else kind of has like this sort of pass-through function. And it sounds kind of strange, but I looked a lot at the aquarium and I looked at how gills worked and stuff. And so, the early, 200s and stuff, they had like, like a black or gray, like on the outside, but then the inside was sort of red, It's almost like you're kind of bringing that air in almost like gills, and you're pushing it out the back. But little funny thing for me is that like, my parents are Japanese. Even though I grew up in Utah, I still am, really proud of my heritage and stuff. And I always trying to bring a little bit of that like Japanese, like the artisan in. So I looked at Japanese lacquerware where they have like, you'd have like a miso bowl that's black on the outside, and they have this beautiful red lacquer on the inside. And a lot of the inspiration for how I treated like the aero features on the Tuono is that like I looked at Japanese lacquerware, So I kind of picked, from different places to try to, come up with something unique and something that's appealing and beautiful, but it really just sort of depends on the customer, and like what it is that I feel like from my research, like what they're aspiring for. Yeah.
I love it, man. I absolutely love it. Yeah, because you can see those things on the Tuono, the little inside behind the winglet, the little, which is always, I thought, excellent little detail. I really like that.
Appreciate it, man.
What are some of like the big challenges of trying to get like your vision through, or like do different companies have a different approach? Like I would want to assume that Aprilia, because they are smaller, they can be a little bit more nimble. You might get a little bit more freedom. Where someone like Kawasaki, big giant Japanese corporation, is it harder? I don't like what are the big barriers you have to get over?
I think because of the cost of development, it's like they reuse parts a lot more. This is across the board, so if they ask you to use the same headlights across the board, because as soon as they switch to LED headlights, I don't know if people realize like how expensive it is to homologate LED headlights. Is very, very expensive. And so that's just something that you're going to start seeing like, reused everywhere and stuff, because it's just, the cost of it is so much higher than the old style, like incandescent lights. So these LED lights, like, one thing that's kind of hard is that you might have like a headlight that they're asking you to reuse, and they might ask you to reuse a headlight that from a totally different type of bike for a totally different customer. And that makes it a little bit challenging, but also exhaust regulations right now, because of the size of the pipes and the chambers that we have to use, all the sensors that are available. Like, I mean, bikes today have more coverings and stuff than the old bikes, because we're just trying to cover like excess wires and like all the ugly bits that, that we're required to have when they leave the factory, so that can be really, really challenging. Is that like, we just have like all these little warts that we're just trying to sort of like finesse, so it's a good thing, right? Like we're making, faster, more powerful bikes than ever, but yeah, with some of that, you're going to have like, some of the pains of like, how do we sort of like wrap this thing in something beautiful, so that's kind of hard. But I would also say like, depending on the company that you're working for, like you're saying, like Aprilia, they are nimble, their product plan is probably a little bit more flexible, whereas the Japanese, they'll have like 100-year plan, and they don't expect to actually follow that 100-year plan, like, 100 years from now, because, of course they don't know what it brings. But I thought it was actually a really interesting exercise, because it really pushed him to think like, what could we be doing in 50 years? What could we be doing in 10 years and stuff? And I think that it kind of made them look at like a bigger picture and stuff, so I wish that every company did that, because I thought it was actually a really fun exercise, like as a designer. But yeah, it's like once it gets to like the next generation, like they stick to that plan pretty hard, like the budget's set, like the vision is set, like, if you want to really move off that, I think it's a lot harder, when you're working with the Japanese companies. So,
well, like Kawasaki Heavy Industries, they make like container ships.
Yeah.
Like it's such a giant corporation. It's so much more than the motorcycle that most of us are familiar with, right?
Yeah, absolutely. It's it's I felt like the motorcycles were just like their marketing budget for like everything else, because it kind of serves as a halo, like, it's this great like ambassador to the world. Like everybody knows Kawasaki, but usually for their motorcycles. With Kawasaki, one thing that I thought was interesting that they have that the other companies don't is that they have a lot of aircraft know-how like in-house, right? And there are different departments, you know, they're different parts of the company, but when they were building that H2, right, like the turbine for the supercharger, it was spinning so fast that I think it would like explode because it was going so fast. So they actually had to get, you know, these guys from their aircraft division to help them engineer it and stuff, you know. But that's something that the other companies, you know, where are they going to go? You know what I mean? So I thought that was actually super cool that Kawasaki was able to draw from these different, you know, departments and stuff.
That's really, really cool. So we're moving into the electric revolution, right? That's coming. You kind of touched on some of the challenges of an electric bike without an exhaust system. What are some of the other things that you see might be coming with electric motorcycle design?
So this is something that I've just personally felt for a while. I feel like electric motorcycles, the way that we are looking at them right now, I call it electric bike 1.0, because really, you know, even if it's like a ground up new design, basically it's a gas bike package without the gas engine, right? Like the frame is the same, the geometry is, you know, usually very, very similar, and they're just putting an electric drivetrain in it. So I kind of call it 1.0, and I just wonder if there aren't some things that we could take advantage of with this new EV drivetrain, right? Because you know, I don't know, the frames that we see right now, right? The tubes kind of went up and around the gas engine because you can't go through it, right? And for that, like, it made sense to have a traditional fork in the front. And so it's like, I think it would be interesting to see electric bike 2.0, where we can kind of question like this package and say, hey, like, are there different ways that we could actually put this together that actually is more beneficial, right? It actually is advantageous to actually change it, because, you know, you've got these batteries that, you know, they look really big and monolithic, but you look inside, they're all these like tiny little like D cell or C shell, like, you know, size batteries that are all like welded up together. I mean, if there's a way that you can split it up, right? So it's like you actually do have some freedom with the packaging of it. And that's kind of what I would like to see for the future of motorcycles. Like, when I think about the bikes that really influenced me when I was a kid, like, you know, I'm Japanese American, so Akira was huge for me, huge. But, you know, you look at like the old like Elf bikes, right? I mean, they did some stuff that were so cool, like, you know, back in the day. And then the Kiwi from New Zealand. Britain, you know?
Yeah.
You just look at like, you know, just some of the out of the box, you know, thinking that was going on back then. Like, I just feel like right now the electric companies kind of have their blinders on because they're saying that this is what worked before and these are the components that we can buy from the suppliers. But eventually I'd like to see a little bit, I don't know, I'd just like to see a little bit more, you know, differentiation, like a little bit more experimentation, because we have a drivetrain that finally lets us do that. And we don't have to, you know, assume that everything is decided already, you know? So that's kind of what I would like to see. But I think, you know, before something like that can happen, we have like this divide right now where electric bikes are so expensive. So you have the boomers that have the money, but they don't really want EV motorcycles. And then you have, you know, it's like you'll have like the Gen Z kids that do want the EV bikes, but they don't have the scratch for it, right? And so you're trying to find a way, like, you know, to bridge that gap and stuff. You know, can we bring electric motorcycles to a point that, you know, that the people who want it can afford it? Or can we make them exciting enough that the people who do have the money are interested? You know, so we're kind of in this weird moment right now in this industry where we're trying to decide like which way to go. You know, I mean, there are like some promising signs of life in this industry. Like when you know, talking about India, they sold 21 million in units in 2019, but last year they sold over 600,000 electric motorcycles in India. 600,000. And if you remember back to what I was saying about the US market, last year they sold 550,000 like of all units, right, in the United States.
So that means that in India, they sold more electric motorcycles than we sold of all bikes in the United States, right? So there's definitely like some signs of some life in that industry, but it's an exciting time because we're seeing it happen before our eyes, but it's also kind of a scary one because like I think there's going to be a lot of fallout, right? There's going to be a lot of companies that like rise and fall. There's going to be like companies that maybe like don't make it, you know. I think you're going to start seeing like a lot of things happening and stuff, you know. But I mean, I think it's actually kind of exciting, you know. Like I think that's what the motorcycle industry needs is like some new blood and stuff. So it's actually pretty interesting to watch.
I don't know if you can answer this question, but is Piaggio doing stuff with EVs that we haven't seen yet? Is there stuff on the horizon, or can you not say?
I can't say anything specific, but I will say this, like, if there's a major OEM out there that isn't doing it, I think they're foolish. And like, I think just because like, you know, I think there are a lot of people who don't love the idea of electric motorcycles. But when we look at the regulations that are coming down from, you know, like I was saying before, it's a global market. So a lot of times we have to build, you know, we usually don't buy, you know, we usually don't build too many bikes for a single market, right? It's like we usually have to share it across several markets. And when you look at all the different regulations that are coming through in Europe and in, you know, Asia, it's coming, you know, and it's like, I think that, I think it's just something that people are going to have to sort of come to terms to because like it is coming, you know, and there might be like some boutique, you know, companies that maybe say, nah, we're not going to, you know, jump on that. But I would say all the like major manufacturers, they have to have something like cooking. They have to.
The funny thing is the number one issue I hear from people about why they hate EVs is the sound. They don't want to lose the sound of the exhaust. And I got to say, I love a quiet motorcycle. Like I love the silence when you just hear the whir and it just kind of like, you're just like going fast without that auditory. I think it's kind of neat. I think we might be missing the boat on trying to like claim this noise. And especially if you look at the non-motorcyclist, you know, like their biggest complaint about motorcycles is the noise, right? Like my wife and I were having breakfast on the coast and, you know, we pulled up on she was on a Super Hawk, the BTR 1000.
Nice.
I was on a TL 1000 and we're sitting there having breakfast with our helmets on the bench. And then a bunch of Harleys come by and they're revving the engine at the stoplight and the baby starts crying and everybody looks at us and gives us a dirty look. And I was like, you know, I'm kind of okay with a quiet motorcycle. I'm kind of good with it, right?
Yeah, like, you know, I feel like one thing that always makes me sad is like, I love track days, right? And when I think about a lot of these tracks, a lot of them are being pushed, you know, farther and farther away from these city centers and stuff, right? And one of the big things, like, you know, if you look at Laguna Seca, for example, you know, the residents there, they always complain about the noise. Like, if you want to do a track day there, you actually have to have a stock exhaust, I think. And, you know, I think if they might actually mic you up and like check you. And if you're,
I think they do.
Yeah.
I think there's a microphone on one of the straightaways. And when you go by, if it's over a certain sound or something like that.
Yeah. Maybe they'll meatball you or something, you know, and be like, get out of here. But I mean, you know, if we can actually make like high performance bikes that are relatively quiet, I mean, I get it because I love the sound of a V4. I absolutely love it. But I'm trying to think of like, you know, the flip side, like what can we actually gain from it? If it actually means that we can start bringing in like recreational, like riding like closer to the city centers and stuff, I'm all for it, right? So if you have, you know, electric dirt bikes and maybe we can actually ride on trails that are, you know, closer so we don't have to drive 2 hours, you know, out of the city, or if we can actually, you know, take our bikes and race them like, you know, half an hour away from your house or something, I mean, I would be all over that. You know, I think that would be so amazing because I think that's the other thing is that like, if you really want to go out and have like that great riding experience, like on these great trails or like at these great tracks, they're all far away, you know, and you have to trailer there, you know, I mean, maybe you can Ironman it, but I don't know. I tried that once and it almost killed me, you know.
Right.
I don't
well, if a track day, you're running the super sticky tires, right? You're going to destroy the tire before you even get there. Like if you're going to, so you trailer, right?
Yeah. You know, so I just kind of wonder if there's like, you know, I think people are just sort of missing out on some of these opportunities that they may have. Like the sport's going to change, right? And this is the thing. everything changes, right? And nothing's gonna stay the same like forever. But like for me personally, I'm there for the ride. You know, I'm actually really excited to see like where it goes, because yeah, we might lose some things, but like I think we can gain a lot of things as well. And it's like, if anything, like I think a lot of people nowadays, time is like their greatest enemy. So it's like, you know, if I want to go to track day and stuff like that, like just, you know, it's like 2 hour drive, you know, each way, you know, and like you want to get there like when the gates open and stuff. So you're waking up early, you know?
Right.
And like, if we can bring that stuff closer, like I think it's actually going to be good to, it'll help us grow the sport, you know? So I think it's actually going to be a net positive. I do.
I actually completely and totally agree with you.
I wish that we had like a skateboard, like an EV skateboard platform for motorcycles, because I just feel like we're just not experimenting enough with that package. I think there's a lot we can do.
Think about that. Like you brought up like the Vincent Black Shadow or like a Norton Featherbed or some of these old motorcycles. Like I restored an old Bonneville. It was hateful, right? It was terrible.
Yeah.
Because it leaks oil and it doesn't, the points get wet. But like if you could just like put something in there and kind of still get that experience.
Yeah. I think we're gonna figure out that. Like it's a tough nut to crack, but I think we'll get there with EV. You know, but it's like lately I feel like it's more of a matter of will, and like will people actually put like money into it and stuff like that? Because if they do, I'm confident that we can crack that nut. You know? Yeah. Especially with like kids who are, I think nowadays, like they're so used to iPhones that they just charge and they don't have to fix it or anything. It's, you know, and like they kind of want that same experience from a bike, to be honest. Like they're not too interested in wrenching from what I've seen, you know?
No. Well, and you're always leaving the house with a full tank of gas, right?
Yeah.
Like you don't have to like, oh, I got to go get gas. I got, you know, like, right?
Yep. So
my biggest concern with any e-technology, and this is going to make me sound old, is I love manual transmissions. And so like the idea of like,
I do too.
Can we still shift? I still want to shift. The other thing that I'm surprised hasn't really caught on is belt drive, right? Because like they're getting stronger, they're getting narrower, no maintenance, again, quiet.
Yeah.
Right?
I think there's two hard things with a belt drive. You need to have larger sprockets. So it's like the front and rear sprockets actually have to be fairly large.
Oh, because it can't make the tight turn.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
The tight turn is what kills belts, right?
So the front sprocket has to be pretty large, which, you know, to keep the same gear ratio, that rear one has to be really big. So like when you look at Zeros and stuff, they have these massive wagon wheels, you know, and that's one thing. But the other thing is the tension that you need. So like the amount of tension that you have to have and like how tight it is, especially when you have like the, you know, the rear like axle adjuster and stuff. Sometimes it kind of pulls it like a little bit askew and stuff.
Oh, no kidding.
Yeah, so it's like sometimes like the belt stuff can be a little bit problematic, but I agree. Like I think it's underrated because it's also quieter. Like you don't get so much like that chain, like, you know, the noise of the chain. You know, that's the type of noise I don't like.
The tension's a big deal. If you're dealing with the swing arm travel, the tension changes to travel. So if you're dealing with something that's already really tight, it's going to limit travel in some situations. You'd have to engineer the swing arm movement to accommodate that.
So I think most of them have like some sort of like a little roller that maintains the tension, so that like, you know, since the motor output shaft and then your swing arm pivot are not concentric, right? So like if it's moving, it's going to get longer at the middle of it and stuff, right? In the middle of the suspension swing. So it's like that's going to be your point of most tension, and then it's going to be a little bit slack at the other points. So it's like, I don't know, it's hard. And I think the other thing is that, you know, even though they're really bulletproof and stuff, chains last so long nowadays. And like even when people don't like clean their chains like they should,
yeah, they'll still get 15,000 miles out of a chain that's never touched.
You know? Yeah. So it's a tough one and stuff, you know, but I mean, when we're talking about electric stuff and like making assumptions, like, you know, this is better than that and stuff like that, I agree with the thinking. It's like, why isn't belt more, you know, popular? Or like between you and me, like I don't know if I told you, but I'm taking an old GTS 1000, took the motor out, and I'm making
Really?
I'm making an electric GTS. And like,
Oh, that's cool.
I'm gonna swap out the rear swing arm for a single-sided swing arm because what I want is like from the right side, all you see is wheel. You don't see
I
like
love
a
it.
fork or a swing arm in front of it. So I'm building that right now, but I've been working on it for a long time. It's just a matter
That's a
of like
big
money.
bike. That is a big, heavy bike.
So that's the problem is that like it's a long bike. The wheelbase is like, dude, it's so much longer than an R6. Like, cause
Well, for sure longer than an R6.
I had like a 3D model of the GTS, and then I had a 3D model of like the R6, like side by side. It's like half a wheel. Like it's so
Oh
much
my
longer.
gosh.
And like, but I want to, with this custom bike that I'm doing, like I'm gonna make it like this sort of like naked Street Fighter type of bike. But I just want to question, it's like, what are we doing with electric bikes? Because forks became dominant because they were cheap to make and they were like the best for that solution, you know. But like, if we have a different package overall, is that always the case? And it might still be, but I feel like people just assume it, you know. And it's one of those things like, you know, if we want to do like recumbent motorcycles too, like
Akira.
yeah, you know, is that something that, you know, people want? I don't know. Like we just have like a lot of assumptions that I think we should actually revisit. And I'm hoping that we can start making some things that are really iconoclastic, right? Like we're taking these things that some people hold as holy and we just blast it away. And we say, no, because this is actually a better way. You know, you just couldn't see it.
Do you remember Honda came out with like, it was like a prototype design experience. It was kind of like a VTR 1000, but it didn't have traditional forks. It had kind of like it almost looked like, do you know what I'm talking about? I can't remember what it was called.
NES bike.
It was gorgeous.
What?
It was stunning looking, but like to not have the traditional fork.
Yep.
Right? Like, so, you know, I'm like the trail braking guy. Did trail braking evolve because that's what the forks do? Is that how we ride a motorcycle?
totally.
Did it come from that?
Yeah.
Or if telelever would have been designed a little bit differently, would that have been, because I think telelever got it backwards, right? The trail gets longer as it compresses. But then the dude that Hasek, the guy that they stole telelever from, right? Like some of his designs were really forward thinking, you know, like the whole industry could potentially look different.
Yeah.
If we would have followed a different path. And would it be better? Would like the whole way we ride be different? You know?
I think it would be, you know, and it's, I geek out about all of that stuff because it's just like, yeah, I just think that we have so many assumptions that we made that like we should revisit, because when I look at other industries, you know, it's like they have a disruptor like fairly often, right? But like I feel like in motorcycles, like disruptors are sort of like shooed away, you know?
Yeah.
And I think, and I understand why, because, you know, these are dangerous vehicles. Like, I think people want to minimize risk, right? So I totally understand it. But sometimes I feel like we're pinning ourselves into a corner. And it's just that, like, if we want a healthy, burgeoning market, we need stuff for everybody else. We need more female riders. We need more young riders.
Oh my gosh. Yeah.
Absolutely.
So name me some of what you see as the best designed, the prettiest motorcycles ever, like your favorite pretty motorcycles.
Okay, so mine are going to be very, very different, I think, for most people. But the first one up there, like, I think I like quirky, right? I like kind of quirky bikes, so I'll just throw that out there. But like, NR750 is like, it will always be in my heart like one of the greatest bikes, right? Like, it was a huge inspiration for the 916, the Ducati 916. I think a lot of people don't know that. But I mean, it was a big influence there. But like, you know, I always loved that bike. To be honest, I always loved like the old, like late 80s, early 90s, like an 88 GSX-R 750 Slingshot. Like, I love that bike. Or like the old ZX7Rs and the double Rs. That was really when I was getting into like when I was in middle school, when I was in junior high, right? Olympus Junior High. There used to be this dealership down at Highland Drive, Perry Brothers. Like,
yeah, Perry Brothers is now way down on I-15.
Yeah.
They're now Honda World. Yeah, I know Perry Brothers. Yeah.
Yeah, so I used to like, before I got my driver's license, I used to go down there and just hang out. And like the salespeople probably were like, who the hell is like this nerdy Asian kid that's just always like he's not gonna buy. Like, why doesn't he get out of here? But they were actually pretty cool about it. They just let me like, I go around and like sit on the bikes and stuff like that. But it's like I would see like all these bikes like, all these like old Ninjas and like these GSXRs and stuff and the old CBRs, I really like the old 400s. Like you were saying, the VF 400s, like from Japan, because, my parents used to get these magazines from Japan and they'd always say, Greg, what do you want? And I'd always say like, get me some motorcycle magazines. And I think the 400s look cooler than the 600s or even the 1000s, back then and stuff, because they looked really, really like race ready. So I always loved those bikes. But I will say like, I also, it's like 916, like I almost feel like that's such a cop-out answer, but I always thought that was such a beautiful bike, and then like the first time that I saw like the first R1, it's like I felt like that really, really sort of did something like, to my heart, but also like I always like things like the when I was older, I found out about like, some of the Vincent bikes, Black Shadow and stuff. And I found out about like how the frames worked. I was obsessed with that for a long time, but also like those Elf recent bikes, they were so quirky, right? They had like this
With the X wheels, the wheels that were the X. Yeah.
and like single-sided swing arms, like, and like, I just thought they were so cool, So it's like, I don't know if I'd call them like the most beautiful bikes, but those are definitely the ones that really like hung with me, like growing up and stuff. And then, I won't lie, like I'm not just trying to please like Aprilia or anything, but when the RSV4 first hit and it had that super minimal tail and it had
with the wings,
yeah,
and the point,
and it had the V4 and stuff, and I'm just like, yo, that thing is so crazy. Like I was at Suzuki at the time and I was like turning around, I'm like, why can't we make this? Why can't we do this?
Yeah, well, in the Max Biaggi Sepang paint scheme, especially, it was like the orange with the big white on the side and the oh man, that bike just like it kind of like moves you. You're like, and then to hear that V4 and the crackle when you shift.
Yeah, man, it just, I don't know. It's like, so I don't know if that answered your question or not. I think maybe my taste is a little bit different than most people, but like, clearly sport bike oriented, but like that 80s, 90s like time was so golden, to me. And it's like, I'll just always love those bikes, always.
Dude, it's hilarious because every bike you mentioned, I was like, yeah, and that one, like some of these obscure, the 400s, like the bike I bought from Bjorn was a CB1 400F.
Oh, I love
right?
those.
Like,
yeah, those are fantastic
the
bikes.
Blue with the metal plates and the, I had a Hawk GT that I just adored with the big aluminum frame and the
single-sided swing arm and all that. Yeah.
Yep, single-sided swing arm is very, very special. The ZX7 with the big black snorkel tubes that came out of the tank and into the. Oh man, I loved those bikes. Absolutely adored them.
Actually, like those bikes that have like the vacuum cleaner like hoses. I want one for like my stable. Like there was just something about having that like right there by your face, and you're just like, yeah, this thing is like so trick. I love that. I love that stuff. Like even like an FZR, like I remember those old ones and stuff. Like they're bubbly and stuff, but I like them. I still like all those bikes.
Yeah, I had an FZR 600 was my first proper sport bike. Yeah, and you gotta like the colors of the 80s too, like all the pinks and the blues and the wiggly lines.
Bring it back, man. Like bring it back. I always thought that stuff was so cool. Yeah.
Did you see someone's doing a retro? They did a retro race something, and it looks like a 1989 Gixxer with the pink and blue squiggle up the side of it on a modern motorcycle, and it looks really good. It looks really good.
Yeah, I'm trying to remember the name of the outfit, but yeah, I was looking at that just the other day. It looks fantastic. Yep. I saw like someone took an SV like and put like an old GSXR like front fairing on it and stuff. And like that looks super cool too. And I feel bad. Like I would mention the name, but I just don't know like who it was that did it. But yeah, that like there's just, the love for that style of bike I think is still there. And I'm friends with the Avi over at Iconic, and like, every once in a while he'll let me just sort of like peek in there, and like they'll have rows of like RC30s, RC45s, and like, like these old like G6Rs and ZX7s and stuff. I'm like, thanks, brother. Like, I needed that. You know? So
Yeah, those bikes are so great.
Yeah.
Which it brings up a question. When you design a bike, are you thinking of the longevity of the design? Like, are you thinking, will this go out of style, or do I want to make something that's going to have more longevity and be cool forever?
It depends on the brand. I think it depends on the brand. So it's like, it's like I feel like there's certain types that like they benefit from staying in the market longer. So like when I was working on Challenger, that was something where it's like I knew that one was going to have like a longer shelf life. So for that one, I kind of, the inspiration for that was a lot more classical, and that, I'm using stuff that I know that market likes, like the muscle cars. With Kawasaki, those guys do turn over their vehicles like pretty often compared to the other manufacturers. So for them, like I was just thinking like, what is sort of hot at the moment, like one thing is that like on that 650, like it has an interesting like windscreen. The windscreen goes all the way down to the headlights. And like what I always thought is that like people would do something with that black surface underneath, like paint it or do like little, do some sort of graphics or something underneath it to, you know what I mean? Like I thought that would actually be sort of like a window for people to do something, cool with it and stuff. Haven't seen it yet. But
nobody's done it. Well, maybe they will now. Maybe they'll listen in and be like, that's a great idea.
Push them, right?
You also worked on the Versus, which again, I think that is a fantastic motorcycle, but also kind of a little bit of a polarizing design. A lot of people don't like it. I personally do.
Mm-hmm. I just did like a little bit on the Versus. Like the Versus, when I first got to Kawasaki, that bike was already like pretty far along. But then, they're making like their last push and stuff, and they needed help. Like I think I helped like design like the muffler like tip of it and stuff, and like
yeah, it's like something pretty small.
Yeah, it's like they're like a lot of that's another thing is like some companies like the bikes are designed by like mostly one guy, and then other places like it might be more of a team. And in Kawasaki, like it's like if we all helped each other, so if some projects were there's just more stuff to design. Like I'll give you an example, like because I had like a background as an automotive like CAD modeler, I was helping on the Kawasaki H2SX, right? Where they just the H2SX was interesting because what they did is that they would one thing that people that I'd love people to understand is that like with the new instrumentation, they're using like these these bright TFT screens now, but a thing that wasn't a consideration in the past is how much it reflects off your windscreen, right? So that was something that they had to we had to do a ton of testing to make sure that you were blinded at night if you're in a full tuck, right? Because the early iterations of that windscreen, like when you're in a full tuck, you could not see anything out of that thing. It was just backward. All you saw was just the screen reflected in the windscreen and stuff, and it was terrible. So I had to use like software to sort of test a bunch of different like positions of a helmet and stuff. And we had to sort of like test it and make sure that these shapes wouldn't actually like reflect back to the user and stuff.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. So there was, the main designer on that, he was off doing like the fairings and stuff, but I was helping him with like some of the smaller bits, like the controls. Yes, I was designing the controls, but then also the windscreen of it, making sure that it doesn't reflect back. And then like, even things like the fork caps, it's like, we're just designing like even like little parts like that. So, some bike companies, they'll not bother with things like the fork caps, but like Kawasaki does, so that's another difference between the different studios and stuff. But I mean, there's, it just kind of gives you an idea of like how much work goes into each one of these bikes. And
I don't think I ever would have thought the fork cap was designed. I always thought that as a mechanical piece.
Yeah.
Like here's the nut to take it off, or, the big piston forks with I thought they were just function before form. I never would have imagined that there was an aesthetic component built into those.
Yeah. Yep. So not every studio, but like the Kawasaki guys, they every opportunity that they had to put their touch on something, they would try, so, the other companies, maybe not so, like maybe they wouldn't get to that level of detail,
the Cali guys they really like to sort of look at that. Yeah.
What's one thing that you wish more people understood about the challenges you face or what it takes to design a motorcycle?
I think the hardest thing for most people outside the industry to understand is it's something that I mentioned before, but like just how global the market is now. You know, like I think in the early aughts, the U.S. really drove a lot of the decision making at these motorcycle companies because they might not have sold as many units, but the total amount of profit was so high. But then as soon as they hit the global recession, it's like, honestly, like this market never really fully recovered to the point that it was like in 2005, 2006. And so, we look a lot at these other markets and stuff. Sometimes we have bikes that are really, honestly designed for other markets that we sell here, and I'll give you an example. Like, I talk to a lot of dealerships. Sometimes it's on business trips or sometimes like even when I'm on vacation, like my wife hates it, but like I'll go visit a dealer and just kind of shoot the breeze with those guys. I just kind of want to know, like, those guys are the front line, right? It's like, they're the ones that really talk to the customers and they're the ones that can really tell me what are the things that are really popular, like in this area. But on the, conversely, like the only thing is that their view on the market is hyper local. So, for like the New York guys will always tell me, it's like, what you guys need to do is polish these frames. Like that, I feel like has never gone out of style in New York. And, like, do you know what I mean? Like these things that are like very local to these neighborhoods. And, even in the United States, the difference between like the Northeast and say California is huge. Or like even like between New York and DC, those two markets have very different tastes. It's wild because they're so close to each other, but like especially color and graphics, it's like what those guys prefer is very, very different. Or like you go down to Florida, like Miami, it's like, to be honest, the way that they ride is different. Their seasons are different, so of course what they want is different, right? Like, extended swing arms will probably never go away over there because they have such long straight roads where they're just cruising out there and they can ride, more months out of the year than the guys up in New York. Right. And maybe the guys up in New York, like, they're trying to turn and make U-turns in like a tight urban area. So they want a shorter, you know what I mean? So I think they just have to understand that like all these bikes that we make, we don't want to make any kind of compromises, but because we're selling to so many different markets, it's like we need to make something that is desirable and livable for all of those different markets, and it's like, there isn't like one single thing that we can do that's going to just like make the bike better for every single market. Like that's rarely the case. But I think that's kind of like what I just want to, send that out there that, we're designing for so many different customers, and it can be, it's a fun challenge, but it is a challenge. It's a really, really difficult challenge. And I think the other, I'll have one more thing. I think the other thing that I would love to throw out there is that, these studios nowadays, like they tend to be very international. So it's like, if you go to a Japanese studio, like it's not just Japanese guys there, right? And it's like, you're going to have people from other markets in there as well. If you go to like Ducati, like, I think they've got like Indian, French, Italian, like, they've got, designers from like all over the place, right? So like this idea that like, just because the country of origin, it's not like, you can't say like, they designed this way or, these guys designed that way. They've got Italian designers at the Japanese studios, they've got Japanese designers at the, European studios. It's really actually quite, it's the studios themselves are actually quite international nowadays.
Well, and I'm going to guess that we're going to see more Indian influence, right? If that market is that big,
yep,
right? Like Indian designers and Indian influence, and
I'm
sure that
super glad to hear you say that because like, yeah, it's like, that's like, kind of taking that information and forecasting, like you think like a designer, Dave, like, I hope you know that, right? Because it's, like, I think that's the thing, you have to look at the data and just think like, where is it going to go? Like if you're really interested in that stuff, like if any of the listeners
are interested in getting to motorcycle design, like I would just really recommend like looking at these different markets, right? Like what are they doing? Like what are they interested in? You know, like if you're really interested in that stuff, like take it and then, you know, start thinking for yourself, like forecast, right? Like what's going to happen? Like, is India going to have like a bigger say in our motorcycle market? Absolutely they are, right? Because it's not just the number of bikes that they sell, but also the passion that they have. Like if you talk to anyone from India that's into bikes and you just, you know, it's like, hey, tell me about Royal Enfield. Like grab a beer, kick back because you're in for a long conversation about like, you know, the grandpa had a, you know, a Royal Enfield Bullet or something. And like, you know what I mean? Like that love runs really, really deep and they're really passionate about it. So I think, you know, it's like our industry is changing, but I mean, if they're interested in it, definitely look past your local dealership, definitely look past the city and the state that you live in. Like look at these other markets, even in the country that you live in, like, you know, because it really is, it's really vast and there are a lot of different markets that you could really geek out on, you know? So I would just say like, if you're curious about it, like stay hungry and look at all the markets that you can. Just try to, you know, take in as much as you can because there's so much out there to see and learn. And it's so like, it's all fascinating. I love it all.
Well, and the interesting thing too about India, there's some really dynamite YouTube channels out of India, and it's pretty accessible for us because it's English, and they're like you were saying, like the passion. Some of these riders, like the KTM 390, there's whole Instagram, most of Instagram KTM 390 because they're made in India.
Yeah,
these kids are so passionate about these little 390s over there and what they're doing with them, and you know, I look at them from a safety guy, and I'm cringing most of the time, right? Like no gear stoppies and like all sorts of crazy stuff they do, but they love it. They really, you know, it is interesting to watch.
Yeah. You know, it's like, I mean, I think you're looking at that right stuff where it's just, you know, seeing like what those guys are into and then just think about like, you know, 10 years from now, what are they going to be into, you know, and you start building like this customer profile, you know, and it's just, once you start like, instead of just, you know, it's like, I hope people can look at like some of this content and like, instead of just passively taking it in, actively thinking about like, what does that lead to, you know? Cause that's what's really important with this market is like, we want not just people who can sketch well, not just people who have new ideas, but also people who can kind of start looking into the future and start forecasting. You know, that's what's really, really important in any kind of like design, you know, occupation, I think, is being able to like, you know, think about it and project into the future. Like, what is it that, you know, this market is going to need 10 years from now? That's key.
Well, and I love how you draw inspiration from the demographic that you're building for. I think that's really, it's kind of like a very positive sensitivity, right? Like this is the person who's going to buy this bike. I want to incorporate things that are important to that demographic. I think that's really cool.
Oh, I appreciate that, man. Yeah. Like I think, you know, I think that's the thing is that like, even if you're not into a certain market, like honor that market, you know, I think that's actually super important. Cause like, I'll just be honest, man. It's like, I'm not a cruiser guy, you know, it's like, I respect it. You know, it's like people who are into it. Cool. You know what I mean? Like I probably won't buy one, you know, but I can appreciate that market. And when I was working on those projects, I really tried to take into account like, you know, you need to use empathy and you have to sort of think about like, what is it that those guys are like, what is it that those guys care about? You know, I'm not trying to design it for me. I'm trying to design it for them. You know, I think that's the other thing is like to be a successful designer, you need to have a really strong sense of empathy where you can look at these markets and sort of like you're trying to understand like what it is that makes them tick, you know? And I'm honestly not, you know, my goal is to always try to design for that market. And if I ever feel like I'm designing for myself, I need to start stepping back and like reevaluating, you know, it's like,
I don't know, based on your taste, I want to see some more like a pure Greg design in a motorcycle because it sounds like I'd probably buy
it. Yeah, man. It's like, you know, I'm working on like some like just personal projects and stuff. So hopefully like I'll just start posting that stuff soon, you know, but yeah, it's like, it is important to have that self-expression too, But yeah, it's like, I think that's the thing, is like the I don't want to say the burden of a designer, but like, just, I think the main goal of a designer should always be like to design for your customers.
Another question I forgot to ask. This one's from May, since she has that yellow Aprilia, the yellow RS. How are colors decided? Like, I'm a little tired of black. I'm not gonna lie, right? Like, but like how like. I kind of like a colorful motorcycle, but I'm sure like there's a whole decision process you got to navigate to determine what color it's going to be. Yeah.
Yeah. So most companies have a team that do the color and graphics, and they'll hire like these really talented graphic designers that'll go in there, and they'll even like formulate their own paint colors and such. And some of it depends. Like the Suzuki guys, like they'll do like a bunch of different schemes that they'll actually go and like focus group and just kind of see, like they'll go to like different parts of the country and to say, hey, what's what kind of like makes your heart sing, and it just sort of depends. Like and then other companies, like they'll just say this is what we're gonna do, and they don't check,
So Kawasaki's gonna be green, right?
Like, yeah, like it's like, I mean, I think the Japanese guys, they usually focus group a lot and stuff, but then the other ones, they kind of do a little bit more from the heart or from the gut, So
I'm surprised that you don't have as much to do with the color as I would have thought. That you're really that's not a big part of what you do. That's interesting.
Yeah, like, I don't know, like I think it's I'm not colorblind or anything, but it's like when I look at these bikes and stuff, I just look at the form. I look at that surface. I look at the volume and the silhouette. So it's like I'm really focused on that, and I don't know. I'm terrible at color and graphics. There are a lot of designers who can do both like equally well. I am not blessed to be one of them, so I'm glad that they don't ask me to do color and graphics. But yeah, they usually have like a separate team, but they're usually like, they'll pull people from like the fashion industry. They'll pull, people from graphic design and these different disciplines and stuff to sort of like, really try to nail it and stuff. But yeah, black was... that was like the default color forever. I agree with you. It's like we need to do something a little more. Yeah.
So I do have, since I'm talking to Aprilia, I have 2 requests of Aprilia. All right.
Go ahead.
I would love the TFT dashes to have a dark mode that I could just leave it in. I don't like the all white all the time, especially when you're on the track. You're like coming across the gauge and you get this big white flash in your eyes as you go by. I'd love a pure dark mode.
Interesting. Yeah.
The other thing, this is a little harder. I would love an RSV4 multistrada with 17-inch front wheels and long travel suspension and a center stand. Yeah.
Yeah.
Like a Touareg with a V4 motor and a 17-inch front wheel. So just throwing that out there.
All right. We'll throw it out there. And like, I wish I was more on the product planning side, because I think those guys always have such a fun time, like coming up with like, new products and like where to take it and stuff like that. But you know what? Like, let's put it out there in the ether and see what happens. You never know.
Yeah, I would love it, because I think like the current multistrada, they're going to 19-inch front wheels, which is fine. Like they're chasing the BMW GS market.
Yeah.
But it's leaving a big gap in that kind of hyper motard, super motard travel bike, which I think, and that V4 motor is such a joy.
Yeah, like it's the V4 motor is like ketchup to me, where you could put it on anything and it's delicious. Like, I don't know. I don't know, Matt. It's like
ketchup is not really the condiment I would have gone for, but
like,
okay.
it's the one that popped in my head, but you know what I mean? Like, I feel like it's just, you could sprinkle that on anything. You're just like, oh, that made it better. It's like V4 dirt bike. Sweet. Let's make it.
Let's make a V4 dirt bike. Yeah. Well, Greg, thank you so much for your time. This was amazing. Be sure to let me know next time you're in Salt Lake, man. I'm going to buy you a coffee. We're going to sit down and we're just going to talk motorcycles some more. All right. Thank you so much for joining us today on Can Chasers Podcast, The Braking Zone. Don't forget about Apex Track Days. Come ride with me. Come do a track day, or Utah Sport Bike Association /schools. Remember, June 4th and August 5th, we have 2 great schools. Alex and I are going to be teaching. It's going to be super awesome. And don't forget about our Discord server. And click like and subscribe. On all these platforms, that's called an engagement score, it's a satisfaction score. It ranks your engagement, and it tells the platform that you like the content or you didn't, and it helps shepherd the content more to your liking. So again, thank you so much for tuning in, guys. Ride on and ride well.